Hello and welcome to today's session of the Natural Birth Summit. Today we're talking about understanding the stages of labour for natural birth. And we're fortunate enough to have with us today Rachel Nolan. Hi Rachel.
Hi Adam.
Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, so Rachel Nolan has been teaching what in the UK are called antenatal classes, childbirth preparation classes for parents. And you've done that, Rachel, haven't you? Both privately and in one of the big hospitals in England.
Yes.
For the last 10 years.
Yeah.
You've also trained in hypnobirthing and taught hypnobirthing. Yeah. And you are also trained in birth debrief, which sounds very interesting, and breastfeeding peer support.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to get started straight away. We're going to dive into our topic about the stages of labour. So tell us about what are the stages of labour that's traditionally referred to.
Yeah, so traditionally what's used in the NHS, certainly in Western maternity care, is that the labour process is split into 3 different stages. But we are going to talk about this a little bit as to how that's changed over the years, because you know, the human bodies are all very unique and different and individual. So some bodies don't follow the lines and follow the rules that maybe traditionally have been set, which is always really interesting because everybody's different. So the stages of labour are the first, second and third stage. And it's very simply put, is the first stage of labour is the work, really. It's all the work that the uterus muscle does. So the uterus muscle is amazing. It has to open to release a baby during birth. And how it does that, it uses its muscle fibres and it shortens and tightens and opens. So it's all about dilation. There's a few different parts to this. It's about a pattern of uterine contractions. Sometimes we call it in hypnobirthing, we call them surges or waves or intensities, or, you know, and it's the work of the uterus muscle. In fact, how I describe it in hypnobirthing is how the muscles work. So I don't know, I always think that's a kind of really nice way of thinking about the different stages, because actually the different muscles of the uterus are really interesting. There's 3 layers of muscles in the uterus. The outer layers are long muscles that run all the way from the top of the uterus to the bottom. Then there's some zigzaggy ones in the middle, and then the underneath layer are circular muscles that go all the way around the uterus. So I always kind of explain it like that, just because I think in my head it's a nice way of understanding and how it feels for that woman and that birthing person. So how it feels is actually how the muscles work. So the first stage of labour is the long muscle actions. The long muscles over the top ripple effect and pull up from above. They're pulling up. And the cervix, the base of the womb, which is thick and long and like a tube-like structure, has to have softened first for this to be really effective. So the first thing that happens at the end of pregnancy, sometimes the last few weeks of the pregnancy, is the softening and opening and a shortening of the cervix. So that has to have happened first. So there's definitely a build-up. There's things that happen first before we even enter the first stage of labour. There's a build-up. And that really needs to happen. And so sometimes when we think about induction of labour, that's why the cervix needs to be softer before any hormones are used. And it's just because the action of those long muscles need a nice soft cervix to open. And they will open then around the baby's head or bottom occasionally. So it's the long muscles pulling up, and they pull up the circular muscles that make up a lot more of the cervix's circular muscles. That's pulled back. So I often sort of describe it with my hands when I teach, but getting an understanding of what that feels like, and actually it does feel like, often feels like for the woman, that the muscles are pulling up, and then you get a much thicker band across the top of the uterus going into the second stage. So then there's a sort of a period of transition going from the first stage to the second stage, where a few changes happen in the body. So we describe it that those contractions in the first stage of labour have been efficient, getting quicker. Most women three things change for most women, that they get closer together, longer, and stronger, so maybe more intense, and that's the kind of pattern that we see. But when, like I said earlier, we don't all fit into the box very easily. The human body is amazing and it's different for everybody, and every individual person is unique. So I've known some women who go through labour, their contractions are 5 minutes apart from the beginning and stay 5 minutes apart the whole of labour, and that's unique to them. So it doesn't always follow the pattern in the first stage of labour of the contractions getting closer together, and even of them getting longer, and even of them getting stronger. Some women will start really strong contractions at the beginning and they stay around the same level. But when we talk about averages, it is those three things. You know, the first stage of labour is the strengthening, the contractions, the surges getting stronger, closer and longer, until that cervix, the opening is completely open around the baby so that the baby can be released. And then that's when we have a thick band of muscle at the top. So the second stage of labour is the circular muscle squeezing. We get a thicker band at the top, and it's those action, and that's what we call the ejection reflex, the fetal ejection. And that's kind of a hard thing to say as well. That's quite something that we have to wait for, and actually giving labour and the woman a chance to wait for her body to do that is really important. The body will eject a baby and do these strong contractions down, and it's just giving time for that to happen, because sometimes there's a bit of a gap in that transition period. So towards the end of the first stage of labour, there's sometimes a gap between that and those second stage contractions bearing down, and then there's often a boost of naturally produced adrenaline in that point, and we call that transition. Sometimes women notice they might panic a bit, or they get self-doubt, they don't believe in themselves anymore, they start to say, I can't do this, I don't want to do it anymore. And another thing we see is they wake up and their eyes are open and they're really looking for eye contact and wanting to talk to you. And you know, sort of women describe that as a bit of a panic. And that's really normal. And the adrenaline comes in to give her energy to birth her baby, which is brilliant. So it's a really good thing, and it's really exciting to see. And I think a lot of
it could be misinterpreted. Sorry, it could be misinterpreted if you didn't know what to expect.
Absolutely. And that's why it's really important to understand it. And when we teach antenatal classes, we are teaching the partners as well. So for the partners to see the flow and see. So I often talk, as well as talking about how the uterus works, the other thing I talk about is behavior. So because the woman's behavior changes throughout as the flow of labour happens. And one of the main things we talk about for the partners to look out for is that transition. So that time that she says, I can't do this, I don't want to do this anymore. Some women might say at this point, I think I need an epidural, I'm not coping, I'm not doing it. And actually, at that point, she's about to birth the baby. So whether she needs an epidural, probably not. By the time they got an anaesthetist in the room, it would probably be too late. She's probably given birth by the time it's put in. You know, and I know that a lot of midwives might say, oh, let's see how we go. And they get excited, don't they? Because they kind of think, yes, we're at this stage. But if you're a partner and you didn't know anything about transition, and your other half is panicking, and you're panicking, you don't know what's going on.
I feel very out of control.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just understanding the human body, which is really the key to why antenatal classes are important, isn't it? It's giving that sense of understanding, knowledge. We always say knowledge is power. We're going to have more, we're going to feel calmer. We're going to feel more in control, feel more autonomy to make decisions that are right for our body if we have the knowledge and we know what to expect and we know what labour might look like. It's interesting. So I teach a partner-only class, and I really talk about the stages of labour from what they see. And that's a really nice thing for the partners to see. And sometimes I will, well, in a live class, in face-to-face classes, I'll get up and I'll demonstrate what it looks like at different stages as well, which is always good fun. Like I throw myself kind of onto a ball on the floor and start grunting and they all kind of and I kind of joke afterwards. I say, well, that's more for the partners. But it's so interesting because I've had partners say, oh my goodness, when she did that, I knew where we were and I knew what we had to do next. So
right.
It is helpful, even though over the years I've thought, why am I still doing this diving? But actually, it's the first time they've seen that, possibly, so it's useful. So I talk about how in early labour, so the first stage of labour, sometimes it's split into latent phase and active phase. That's early, and then the active phase is the later phase. And how the behaviour changes, because women can often talk through those surges in early labour. Her voice will be normal. She'll probably give it eye contact. She's probably able to move around. But as the labour progresses, we start to need to grip onto things and hold. We start to have to concentrate really hard and actually focusing on breathing. Eyes will be closing. Women get much more insular and intense as the labour progresses. So when we get into active labour, women usually cannot speak. There's no talking. She'll have her eyes closed. She starts going very into herself, and she'll probably grip onto someone or something, and she'll need to hold on, which is interesting. So we kind of talk about, depending on where she is. If she's lying down, she might not need to do that, but if she's standing, she'll probably need to hold on to maybe her partner or whoever's there, or her midwife. So and the behaviours change, and there's other things that we might see as well. People talk about the purple line on the back, on the lower back, can show how far along the first stage of labour a woman is by how far along the purple line is on her sacrum, so on the skin, on the outside of the sacrum. Okay. Not many people know about that one. So there's other things as well as looking at contractions that show us maybe where she might be in labour.
Yes. So that's very interesting, isn't it? Because if you went by sort of a standard linear dilation or contraction spacing, then you would not be in tune with what's actually happening. And you might think that there's progression isn't happening, and then you start thinking about what to do about that. But actually, if you were tuned in and not looking at this averages kind of scale, then you would know that actually labour is progressing. Is that right?
So absolutely. So there's lots of other things. There's behaviours. The feet getting very cold is another sign. I know that sounds a bit funny, but often the peripheral circulation, because all the blood is going to the uterus, so women's hands and feet in labour often get very cold, and the cold might get further up the leg. And I always think that's a really interesting sign. I mean, it's not particularly researched or proven by any point, but a lot of doulas talk about that. They talk about feeling the feet. All these other signs that come. Yeah. So you're right. When we think about linear things, this is really interesting. And over the years, so in the 50s, there was a doctor called Dr. Friedman, and lots of people will have heard of the Friedman curve. And he plotted women to dilate at certain pace and rate, and plotted a curve on a graph. But actually, the Friedman curve his research was based, half of those women went into labour spontaneously, but half of them were actually induced and were using both epidural or actually in the Friedman curve, they were using the anaesthetics that created a twilight sleep, which is kind of very, very old, sort of back in the 50s when women were very much drugged, and they were half asleep and they weren't really consciously aware of what was going on. I think it's certainly something that's moved on very much in maternity care.
Thank goodness.
It's quite scary, but interesting, really interesting what happened in the history of midwifery. I always think it's a fascinating subject. But so half of them had the hormone replacement. So the so oxytocin artificially as a hormone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all those curves were based on research that wasn't specifically for just spontaneous labour. So it's very difficult then, if a woman's in spontaneous labour, to then plot her against a graph that was plotted on research done on women who were having the hormone drip, and that's completely
on a different pathway. Yeah,
it's a completely different pathway. And again,
yeah.
that research was repeated in 2002 by Dr. Zhang, and his research showed a very similar curve. Again, half of them were induced with the syntocin drip, and I think it was pitocin, and that was an American study. Really, we can't base spontaneous labour on in the same category as women who are being either augmented or induced labour with the hormone, because the hormone drip works in a very different way. So yeah, it's a minefield, isn't it? And lots of these graphs are used and women are plotted against, but actually women are completely unique. And those graphs are always plotted on the average. Now, this is what I find really interesting, because the average is going to be like a middle point, isn't it? There has to be a point decided on where the average is. But we know that some women go into labour and give birth in 3 hours. And that's just some women do it very, very quickly. And some women might be in labour for 3 days. So if we're plotting everybody's body to work or should be working on this average number, then probably half of women that go past the average, the ones that lead up to 3 days, we're going to be thinking that their bodies aren't working and their bodies are failing and that's even the words we hear. We hear things like failure to progress, but actually maybe that woman's body does take 3 days to give birth. And what's so bad about that?
That's okay.
And that's okay. Sometimes she needs, as long as she's resting and eating and is cared for and feeling safe and warm and she's got all her needs, maybe some women can labour for 3 days. That's actually okay. Yeah, and I often talk in classes about, and I know that this will be on some of the other videos in the summit, but on the things that slow labour. And I categorise them into 3 things. I always talk about 3 things slowing labour down. So if we're thinking, how do we progress labour a little easier, it's doing the opposite to these. So the 3 things that often will slow labour, one is fear, and that is because of oxytocin and adrenaline. And will stop the hormones, the very hormones we need to give birth efficiently, is slowed and stopped by adrenaline, because in the body we can't produce adrenaline and oxytocin at the same time. So the minute adrenaline comes in, oxytocin production then slows down, doesn't it? Because that's a different state of our nervous system. And our nervous system can only be in our heightened stress state or our lovely calm state, and we can't really be in both. So fear is the biggest one. The second one we talk about is the suboptimal position of the baby, and sometimes the position of the baby can have an impact on how long labour is. So that has a big impact, doesn't it, on how, and maybe for some women, how long the labour might last. So suboptimal positioning, and so it's trying to counteract that by encouraging women to do things that help their baby into an optimal position. And I talk about that a lot in classes, walking, swimming, yoga, upright forward leaning positions, dancing movement, all the things that we know help. So yeah, suboptimal position. And the third thing that we often talk about is the medicalisation of childbirth. So clock watching and the timing, and that's what I'm talking about, these charts and actually putting pressure on the human body, because we know birth happens when the woman is switched off her thinking, and her thinking brain is quieter. So she's in her calm state, in her calm physiological state of her body. So it's called the parasympathetic nervous state. And that's when labour happens, in that state. So for that to happen, her brain needs to be calm. She needs to feel completely safe to switch off, completely relaxed, completely undisturbed, unobserved, private. All of these things are crucial. And if we are timing contractions, if we are plotting, if we're monitoring, if there's beeping machinery and lights and torchlight and, you know, poking and prodding and of the body, is really hard to be in that calm state for any human. It's really difficult. So trying to avoid as much as we can interventions as much as possible. Obviously they're needed when they're needed. But if we can avoid unnecessary interventions and unnecessary
protect that sense of calm, basically, and avoid interruption that causes anxiety that will kick in the adrenaline system.
Absolutely. So in terms of how long does the human body take to give birth, there's so many factors, and there's even other factors. Sometimes it's genetics, sometimes it's the bladder. And I often talk about if a woman's got a full bladder, sometimes that can stall the baby moving down, which is really interesting. And I've had a few women in the last couple of years that have needed help with their bladder because actually the bladder was full. They didn't really know. They were trying to do a wee, they couldn't wee. In 2 of the cases, the women were catheterized, and in one, I often tell this story actually. In one the woman was catheterized, and 2 more contractions, the baby was out from all the way being quite high up. So she was in the second stage, pushing and pushing, fully dilated for a long time, and actually they realized her midwife was concerned and her partner, and they were like, she hasn't done a wee for a long time and she's drinking lots. So actually, you know, sometimes it's other things as well. It's not always.
Okay, that's fantastic. Indeed. So you talked about first stage, about that's a really wide range of possible times that could go for. It's very individualized. The signals that we sometimes we look for can be misleading around changes in contraction period and progressive dilation. These things can be mixed signals, can't they? Now, and then you also talked about transition, and transition as being there's this change from the very internal focus of the mother to being more alert. Perhaps the adrenaline side is kicked in. Eyes are open, not really sure what to do with themselves. And is that a long stage? How long might that last for? That
again, different for everyone. It might just be a couple of minutes. For some, it might go on where she's feeling quite shaky, and for 20 minutes, you know, it might go on. But that adrenaline has a purpose. So the adrenaline, then the body moves into the second stage. Sometimes she won't have any surges, any contractions for a good 20 minutes for some women, while her body's just kind of coping with that adrenaline, getting ready.
Gathering itself.
And then that ejection reflex starts from the top, and those circular muscles squeeze together. And often that's why, so it feels like everything's pushing from the top of the uterus. That's why women describe it as my body's pushing. It's like a bearing downwards. So it's a different sensation, and it's a different feeling. And that adrenaline's there to give her energy. And actually, women often describe the second stage of labour as being quite powerful. They're strong, they feel they've got more energy, and they don't know where it's come from. Well, we know it's the adrenaline that's come naturally in the body. So it's there, it's useful. But hopefully the panic bit calms, maybe a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes. The other thing that comes up sometimes, and so I've been at a couple of births recently as a volunteer doula as well. That's another sort of volunteer role I've been doing. And I saw the woman I was with last summer going through transition because she got very shaky as well. So, you know, adrenaline affects us in different ways, doesn't it? And she was quite shaky with it, and she felt really cold, which was interesting. And it was just different signs of that transitioning to that second stage. It's you might see.
So in second stage, the woman remains alert as she became in transition.
Yes, absolutely. And I
And
often say to the partner, like, give eye contact now. She might not,
right,
I say she might not have looked at you for 6 hours. And suddenly she's having a panic and now she's looking at you. And this is a really good time to really, get eye contact, to hold her hand, be in front of her. And I always say that to partners, sort of help her through this, but nice and calm and quiet, like not too shouty, not too
reassuring.
loud, because
Yeah.
that adrenaline's come up. We need to still keep that nice and calm. We need to keep her feeling safe again. I think that transition period can sometimes make a woman feel a bit unstable. And then, so she still needs that reassurance. And I talk about a lot of positive affirmations at this point.
Yeah.
So if she's panicking and she's saying, I can't do this, then what I encourage partners to say is, you are doing it. You're amazing. Your body is amazing. And things like that. So to repeat, I try and get some of the birth partners to learn some good affirmations. Things at that point is really helpful is focusing on the baby, because actually maybe the baby's going to be born within the next few hours. This is, so saying things like, we're going to meet the baby soon, is really powerful, I think, at that point.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Wow.
just trying to kind of encourage that, keeping her really feeling safe again and feeling calm again, get that adrenaline working just on the uterus and not too much on the panic of the brain, I suppose.
Yes, and then the baby is then in second stage is going into and through the birth canal, through the pelvis. Can you just talk about that for a moment? How is the baby going to get through the pelvis?
Well, absolutely. So the baby doesn't ever come out straight. I always talk about babies corkscrew. They twist and they turn and they move to fit through the best and most kind of suitable space they can get through. Some babies will corkscrew and do a full 360 turn as they come down the birth canal. So they're working with the body. So they work with the woman's pelvic floor, interestingly, and they work and they turn. The contractions help them rotate as well. And they're being brought through the birth canal very slowly. Sometimes there's a little bit of back and to and fro. And I often say that to women, that actually sometimes it feels like the baby's coming down, it's coming back up again, it's coming down, it's coming back.
Right.
It's really common for women to experience that feeling. And then it starts to make its way to the outside world. So we talk about coming through the vagina, through the perineum. And the actual crowning, some midwives call it crowning, or the birth point where the baby is moving down and out. And that can, again, feel very different for women. Sometimes women panic that they feel like they're going to do a poo, but actually that's okay, because that's the same feeling and it's normal to feel that and not to worry. It's just really the baby is pressing on their bowel as well. So actually that is the sensation that they feel. And to try and stay as lovely and calm and to breathe the baby out slowly is the key, isn't it? I always talk about trying to really work on the breathing, lovely slow breathing techniques. That hopefully they will have used all the way through, practiced all the way through.
Yes, because if they're habits, they'll be easier to bring in at the right time, won't they?
At the right times. And so birthing the baby as slowly as possible is really crucial to help prevent any tearing or damage, and and really just trusting the body and trusting this ejection reflex, which does work, and it does that. I always
in terms of, sorry to interrupt, but you were talking about the baby navigating its way through the pelvis and the corkscrew.
Yes.
So what helps that baby do that?
Well, it's all back to trying to give the baby space so it's upright, being off the sacrum bone so the sacrum can open and pivot and it gets a lot more space. The sacrum can sometimes press out into the back. During the second stage of labour, if a woman's leaning forward, sometimes you see on her back, and that's another sign that the baby's moving down, which is brilliant. You see, it's called the rhombus of Michaelis. The back is pushing out into her skin as like the kite shape of her sacrum. And you see it protrude on a lot of women. Not all women. Again, it doesn't always move completely out, but some women it will. So being upright, actually the woman's body can open its space. I always talk about freedom of movement being more important, to move where her body is telling her to move, because our bodies are so clever at telling us which position to be in. So for some women, it might be more comfortable lying down. Maybe off the sacrum is going to help with the space, but it's going with how she feels and having that freedom of movement as well as, the support. It's really crucial for her to listen to her body. And it might be that she feels better with one leg up somewhere, or with kneeling forwards, or squatting, or standing. I've known some women just want to stand up to give birth, and some even push up onto their tippy toes, which is another point, that if a woman gets up onto her tippy toes, that's her outlet of her pelvis opening further, which is really clever. So maybe the baby pushing down and her body's telling her to rise up, to open the outlet of the pelvis. It's fascinating when you see women giving birth in a physiological way, doing it without constraints, without being sort of
opening their bodies to let the process happen.
Absolutely.
So that confidence, having the confidence and the knowledge to be open, to let the process go, and to notice what's happening to their bodies and their babies. Absolutely. It sounds like that's really crucial in this process.
It really is, because labour and birth are so instinctive, aren't they? And I think the woman's instincts always in pregnancy as well, and labour and birth and in motherhood are so, they're so vital, those instincts. They're so right. Yeah. They're so correct. We need to be listening to them. I do think a lot of women don't tap into them, and maybe don't feel they trust their body. So when I teach classes, I'm all about trying to empower. That's the biggest thing I can do. Give people tools, tell stories of other women who've empowered themselves, or empowering the partners to speak up and ask questions, and try and kind of be as autonomous as possible. And listen to their body. It is so important. It's so important.
Yeah. Fantastic. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention about second stage at this point?
No, I think we've gone through it all. I think behaviour changes, and in terms of third stage, that is the release or the birth of the placenta. So that's obviously the baby's born, baby's out, and then the placenta needs to come out. And that's all done through uterus contractions again. So it's the drive of the uterus contractions. I often describe it as the muscle fibers of a really strong contraction after the birth will crisscross over each other. Those break off the capillaries that hold the uterus up on the wall of, hold the placenta, on the uterus wall. So how the uterus and placenta are kind of held together is tiny little capillaries, blood vessels. Yeah. So those blood vessels then break away and detach, and the placenta detaches through the muscle fibers. So we need really good contraction. So we really need huge levels of oxytocin for this to happen. In fact, I think is it Michelle O'Donnell talks about, this is the point in labour where we actually need the most oxytocin. It's not for the beginning, it's not for the birth, it's now, it's at the third stage. Right. We actually need the most. So, and this is quite hard to do with a room full of people, because we know what helps the body make oxytocin is privacy, safety, relaxation, switching off the brain, darkness, all the things that. Right. And often I do see women do struggle with the third stage in a physiological way because the lights are put on and everyone's taking photos and everyone's being quite loud and saying, oh, what are you going to call the baby? And everybody's suddenly very animated. And actually, that's really not helpful. Right. The human body, to release the placenta, we need the mum and the baby together, no separation. We need a lovely, calm, dark room. Yeah. Excuse me, sorry, I've got a tickle in my throat.
Skin to skin contact, I imagine.
Skin to skin. So skin to skin and trying to initiate breastfeeding are going to be the key, but also keeping it really nice and calm and dark and quiet, and not too many strange faces coming into the room. You know, really supporting that that first hour is so special and so important. And then the woman's body will release the placenta by itself, and we call that the physiological third stage. A lot more women now have their third stage managed, even after a very straightforward birth, which is interesting. And I do think it's this. I think we kind of forget that oxytocin needs darkness and quiet
Yes.
and privacy. And I think
So
that
just hold off the lights, hold off the excitement, hold it off for a little while. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think just trying to have time to wait for that, because sometimes the placenta might take up to an hour, and that's okay. Again, it's the time constraints, isn't it? And very difficult. So it's letting the body work and letting the woman have time with her baby. She needs to nuzzle and sniff her baby. I always talk about hats, and if the baby's not wet and you know, is not too cold, and the body heat from skin to skin is enough. We don't need a hat on a newborn unless they're away from our body. So when a body's doing skin to skin, I think the only exception is possibly in an environment where it's a lot colder. So in a theatre, I think probably a hat's quite a good idea in a newborn, because they have the air conditioning on. It's really cold. So after you know, a theatre or a cesarean birth, a hat is important. But if the room's really warm, why are we putting hats on babies? Because the mum needs to smell her baby. She needs to cuddle and sniff and, you know, snuggle in.
And vice versa. That contact.
The baby needs to do exactly the same. So hats can be a bit of a barrier. And I always say, take the hat. You know, if the hat's put on your baby, take it off. You know, you don't need a hat. Your skin to skin does the temperature control. That's the thermometer. Your body is the radiator for your baby. So, yeah, I think we really need to, if women are trying to have a physiological third stage, remembering, keep it dark, keep it quiet, and just keep that skin to skin. And that's such a precious time.
One thing that's changing, let me ask you a question. One thing that's changing in the past 20 years is this question of our understanding of what's going on between the uterus and the baby during and after third stage. And so, you know, practices around cord clamping, which were fairly, what we would now view as aggressive. They were very soon clamping, weren't they? Now, where are we now? What is the approach that mothers need to think about in terms of cord clamping?
Yeah, so in terms of cord clamping, there's kind of two buzzwords that are used. One is delayed cord clamping and one is optimal cord clamping. And really the ideal is optimal. And that is just waiting until the cord is white. So people talk about waiting for white. So the cord will continue to pulsate for quite a while for some babies. Some it's quicker. Sometimes it's sort of 7-8 minutes, and others it's longer. And that cord pulsating back. When we talk about delayed, it's putting a time limit on it. So, and that's up to the couple, the woman herself. What does she want? We know that probably the blood at the beginning is more high pressured, and maybe more of it is back to the baby in the first few minutes. So with doing the injection or a managed third stage, which uses synthetic oxytocin injection, the midwife likes to cut the cord before that. So asking and having this detailed in your birth plan, if a woman's having the managed third stage, to ask for a set time, and that could be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever the requests really should be respected. It doesn't really matter how long it takes, because actually for the placenta to attach on its own, it could be longer, so it doesn't really matter. Optimal cord clamping we know is best for babies, and that is the baby getting all of their blood back. So less blood will come back out. So the blood coming from the placenta to the baby has so many benefits. It's the baby's blood, so all of their stem cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, all of their amazing nutrients that belongs to them. But the second thing is that blood is oxygenated. So that's really important, because that is giving them oxygen, continuing to give them oxygen for the first 5 to 10 minutes, maybe even longer of their life. So if a baby isn't breathing quite, straight away, sometimes babies don't breathe in the first 30 seconds, it's still getting oxygen exactly like it would if it was still in the womb. So it's not a problem. And actually, that's so important for the health of newborns. So important. So letting the cord pulsate, we think that around a third of the baby's blood is still in the cord at birth. And actually that needs time to drain back. So in terms of averages, so if you think about a 7-pound baby would have a total blood volume of around 450 mils. So about 150 mils is still in the cord. So it's a large amount. Let's let that back to the baby, and that transfusion back in, because it's the baby's blood. So yeah, I always talk about that in classes, and deciding whether we leave it and wait till it empties, and that tends to be the case in a physiological third stage. I think often the cord isn't cut until actually the placenta's out. So that could be up to an hour, half an hour up to an hour. So that would definitely be optimal. All the cord blood would be back. The time that we might need to set a time on it and say delayed cord clamping for a set time is if a woman was having the injection or a managed
injection.
That's slightly different. But yeah, again, it's respecting the hormones and respecting what we know. What slows labour is fear, and lights and too much interference and talking and stress and pressure. And again, timing pressure is sometimes not helpful at the third stage either. So maybe take away the clock watching and just let the woman cuddle her baby and get so kind of in the moment, in that bubble with her baby, and protect that and keep her warm as well. I think sometimes we forget, keep her, once she's stopped labouring, sometimes she might start getting a bit cold.
She's not working anymore.
Not as much. There's still some
not as much. Yeah, sorry, somewhere. Yeah.
So we need to think about that. Keep her nice and warm. Maybe get her something nice and warm to drink. A nice warm drink would be a good idea. Yeah, so many things to think about. But yeah, this is such an important time where we need the most oxytocin. So it's just remembering that, isn't it?
Fantastic. Rachel, that has been really fantastic as a introduction for the mothers who are watching, introduction to their bodies, what's happening, what to think about, what to avoid, how to recognize those state changes, and the transition one particularly. And you also touched on how partners can tune into that and support in the right way at the right time. I really hope there's some dads and birth partners watching too. So fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. I was left wondering if there was video of this throwing yourself on the floor to act out.
I don't think I ever will. I'm going to keep that for just my classes. Keep that.
There you go. Okay, fantastic. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
If mothers would like to learn more about what you do, or what are the next steps that they can take in terms of finding out more about you and what you offer?
Yeah, so I've got certainly if they're living in the Midlands, I've got a website and Instagram, RachelNolanBirth.com, and on Instagram it's just Rachel Nolan Birth, so come and find me. I teach hypnobirthing classes privately. I do a lot going out to people's homes on a one-to-one, workshops that are like 3 hours or 10 hours, the full course. You can do a full antenatal course with me, one-to-one. And yes, come and find me, come and follow my page, that would be great.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. It's been an excellent conversation, and we're going to sign off. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks very much.